Hey listeners, this is Ben, the Amateur Exegete, and you're listening to Episode 9 of Bible Study for Amateurs. Today's episode is the Atheist the Fool of Psalm 14 verse 1? If you've spent any amount of time on social media interacting with atheists and Christians, you will have undoubtedly noticed just how emotionally charged and downright vitriolic these conversations can be. Sure, there are some thoughtful atheists and thoughtful Christians, but it sure does feel like social media, Twitter, Facebook, and so on, is where intellectually stimulating conversation goes to die. I've seen one too many a thread wherein the atheist will charge his believing interlocutor with trusting in a book of fairy tales written by their sky daddy. And in reply, trollish Christians have any number of retorts. One of the most popular is to throw up the text of Psalm chapter 14 verse 1 and either follow up by telling the unbelieving party that they are the fool the verse talks about. That is, they must be stupid for not believing in God, or to just let the verse speak for itself, something the text simply cannot do. But here's a question. Is the fool of Psalm chapter 14 verse 1 an atheist? Let's first ask the question, what is an atheist? We'll use the definition put forward by Graham Oppy in his contribution to the Cambridge Elements of Philosophy. Atheists believe that there are no gods. Hence, in suitable circumstances, atheists affirm that there are no gods and endorse the claim that there are no gods. So, based upon Oppy's definition of the term, an atheist would make the claim that seems to be at the heart of Psalm chapter 14 verse 1, namely, that there is no God. Provisionally, it seems plausible that if atheists say that there is no God, and, per the psalmist, fools say that there is no God, that atheists must be fools. Check and mate. Not so fast. We need to ask another question. In the mind of the psalmist, what exactly is a fool? Normally, we think of a fool as someone who is just plain D-U-M dumb. They're stupid, ignorant, silly, and intellectually deficient. But is this what the psalmist means when he uses Nabal, the Hebrew substantive translated as fool in most English versions? You may recognize Nabal as being the name of the husband of Abigail from 1 Samuel chapter 25. My lord, Abigail implores David in verse 25, do not take seriously this ill-natured fellow, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But what was the nature of Nabal's Nabalness? In the narrative of 1 Samuel chapter 25, there's no suggestion that Nabal is a dim-witted rube of a man who couldn't tell you the difference between Jerusalem and Jericho. Instead, Nabal's folly is of a moral nature. He refuses to provide for David's men when they ask for assistance. It is for this reason that both Nabal's wife and one of his own workers refer to him as ill-natured. David takes the refusal personally, telling Abigail in verse 21 that her husband has returned me evil for good. Nabal is a Nabal because he is not a good man. Returning to Psalm 14, we can now better understand what the psalmist means when he uses the word fool. Not one who is intellectually deficient, but one who is morally deficient. This becomes quite clear later in the psalm, as the Nabal is one who, per verse 4, is an evildoer, an individual who eats up my people as they eat bread, and who, per verse 6, would confound the plans of the poor. This despite that, per verse 6 again, Yahweh is the poor's refuge. The Nabal, then, is not one who subscribes to some version of philosophical atheism, but instead is a practical atheist, one who lives their life as if they can do whatever they want, to whomever they want. The concern is not a philosophical question of God's existence, writes Robert Alter, but the scoundrel's lack of conscience. His feeling that he can act with impunity because he thinks that he need not fear divine retribution. Atheism, as a philosophical position, was not common in the ancient world, especially not in the ancient Near East. As John Day observes, such theoretical atheism probably did not exist in ancient Israel. The vast majority of people thought the heavens were overrun with gods, and that some gods were superior to others. In the ancient Israelite cult, Yahweh reigned supreme. It seems improbable that the psalmist would have in mind a philosophical atheist. His "there is no God" proclaiming fool would have believed that there was, in fact, a God. Now hold on a minute, you object. The psalmist clearly writes that the fool says in his heart, "There is no God," so how can you say that this fool simultaneously believed there was a God and didn't? Well, that isn't a question for me so much as it is a question for the author of Psalm 10, who writes in verse 4, "In the pride of their countenance the wicked say, God will not seek it out. All their thoughts are, there is no God." This is synonymous parallelism, a poetic device wherein one line of a couplet restates and explains the other. Here, God will not seek it out is the equivalent of there is no God in the minds of the wicked. For the psalmist, the wicked believe in God, but they don't think that he will do anything about their wicked schemes. So too, the author of Psalm 14 laments a world in which the wicked behave as if the God they know to exist will do nothing about their wickedness, particularly their treatment of the poor. So, is the fool of Psalm 14 verse 1 an atheist? Not a philosophical one, that's for sure. Instead, the God-denying fool is one who consciously harms the poor, preferring to elevate their own status not only over that of the poor, but at their expense. He is a fool, not because he believes there's no God, but because he does. But he also thinks that that God will not act. In other words, his belief in God is insufficient to motivate doing good. The psalmist, per Walter Brueggemann and William Bellinger Jr., in their commentary on the Psalms, links social destructiveness to theological indifference. That's all the time we've got this week. See you next time, and remember, in the words of Richard Elliott Friedman, one does not need to deny what is troubling about the Bible in order to pay respect to what is heartening. See ya.